In my early 20s, I had struggled with an eating disorder and body dysmorphia, and very militant about how I take care of my body in my younger years. What I realized in that moment was, again, how I had this internal judge making sure that I was doing things right. It was about trust and how I speak to myself and whether my nervous system feels safe with me and whether I actually trust myself without the internal cracking of the whip or the high bars that I walked around with. So today, what I want to talk to you about is about our internal dialogue, self-trust, what it means, especially in midlife, to lean into feminine energy instead of leading with the internal whip. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Daily Surrender. I've just returned from 2 blissful weeks away in Florida with one of my spiritual besties, Carmen. If you've listened to some of our past podcast episodes, she has been a guest on the podcast twice already, then you already know how sacred that friendship is to me. And if you haven't, I'll drop the links below where you can listen to us share more about spiritual friendship and what it means to really walk with someone who sees you, sees all of you, who holds you accountable and does it in love. This trip for me was really intentional. It was not just a getaway, it was a stepping away from my everyday routine, from structure, from productivity, from being on, from the subtle noise that we don't even realize we're swimming in every day. I went in with the intention of relaxing, of course, but also of observing. I really wanted to observe in a quieted space my own thoughts, observe where I was still self-abandoning, observe where I was still worrying about other people's feelings too much, taking on what's not mine to take on, observing where I leak energy because my boundaries aren't as solid as I'd like them to be. And one of the agreements that Carmen and I made before starting this trip together, 2 weeks, 2 weeks is a long time to spend with someone else. We made an agreement that we would move our bodies when we felt called to move, and we would not if we didn't. We would eat healthfully because that's just what we do, but we would eat when we felt like eating, and we wouldn't should ourselves, and we wouldn't have strict rules around things. So we went into this without formal workouts or structured programs or schedules. We really tried to go into this space, the sacred space that we created for ourselves without shoulds. And interestingly enough, I ended up walking a lot. I was on a beautiful beach in the Gulf down in Florida in Pensacola, and I soaked it up. I wasn't thinking about how many steps I was getting. I wasn't thinking about formal exercise or making sure I moved my body so that I stayed metabolically healthy and all the things. I walked because I wanted to. I walked so that I can connect with nature, connect with the waves and the sand and God and myself, and I just let it all be okay. We ate really beautifully because that's just, again, who we are. But we also allowed ourselves to indulge. We had popcorn multiple times on the couch at night while watching movies. We had ice cream out. We had some amazing seafood meals where we really, really savored whatever it was that we felt like we wanted to eat. And we did all of it without any guilt. And what surprised me the most wasn't the rest that I had on the trip, because I certainly experienced a lot of rest, it was what surfaced at the very end of the trip. On one of my very last walks, I noticed that my body just felt a little softer, a little, maybe a little heavier, a little stiffer. We did also sit a lot on the couch, maybe a few pounds heavier. And I watched the old impulse rise up inside of me, that old impulse that wants to tighten, control, fix, create a strict regimen or plan to get back on track. And instead of cracking the whip, which is what I had done for the majority of my life, I heard myself saying something very different. I heard a much kinder, softer dialogue inside of my mind. And I heard myself say, "It's okay, Jen. It is so okay. We will find our center again." And at this point, it was at the very end of my trip. It was last Thursday that I had this internal dialogue on my walk. I was doing a lot of self-reflecting on the trip. What am I walking away with? What did this trip do for me? So I had had a lot of time to be in the seat of the observer to my own thoughts. So when that thought popped up, it was a moment where something really profound opened up for me, because I realized that maybe this wasn't about food or workouts at all. Like this internal strict dialogue that I'd had for so long that had kept me on track. Now, we're not going to touch on it in today's episode, really, but I'm someone who in my early 20s, I had struggled with an eating disorder and body dysmorphia, and very militant about how I take care of my body in my younger years. And I've done a lot of work on softening that. But what I realized in that moment was, again, it wasn't just about my physical body and how I had this it's almost like this internal judge making sure that I was doing things right. It was about trust and how I speak to myself and whether my nervous system feels safe with me and whether I actually trust myself without force, without the internal cracking of the whip or the high bars that I walked around with. So today, what I want to talk to you about on the episode is about our internal dialogue. I want to talk about self-trust, softness, what it means, especially in midlife, to lean into feminine energy instead of leading with the internal whip, which can have more of a masculine energy about it. So let's go there together in this conversation. All of the conversations we have in this podcast are conversations that relate to something that I'm walking through, have just walked through, something that I'm experiencing, because that's the way that God shows me what we need. And oftentimes what I'm walking through is what one of you is walking through. So again, let's take a look at trust and the ways that we speak to ourselves that reflects whether we actually really trust ourselves, which is going to be very supportive of a regulated nervous system, or internal dialogue that shows that we don't trust ourselves. And as you can imagine, that's going to have a profoundly different impact on our overall nervous system. So as I was on my trip, like I said, I did a lot of sitting in the seat of the observer. So sitting in the seat of the observer is actually a term that I learned from Michael Singer. A really impactful book has been The Untethered Soul. And what Michael Singer talks to in sitting in the seat of the observer is the ability to sit and notice our internal dialogue, notice our thoughts without tethering ourselves to them, without immediately assuming that our thoughts are truth, are reality, are who we are. So on this trip, again, as I've already shared, I spent a lot of time in this white space that I had, just noticing what goes through my head. Like, what are the thoughts that flow through my mind, and how many of them are actually really part of my true identity? How many of them are really in alignment with who I am? And how many of my thoughts are just thoughts that maybe are influenced by past experiences or external things? They're just thoughts. So the more that I did it, the more that I realized that my thoughts are not my identity. And running thoughts, like taking the thoughts that we have and having a purposeful pause and then running them through our internal God filter helps us to identify what are the thoughts that we do actually want to cling to or to take action from, and what are the thoughts that we can just let blow on by like a leaf in the wind on a fall day. We don't need to tether ourselves to every single mental impulse that we have. We don't, but many of us do because it's so automatic. I realized how many thoughts of mine come from old programming, and they're not truth. They're not God. They're not me. So when we don't immediately react or run in to fix, the nervous system settles. It's calm. It doesn't go into hypervigilant fight or flight. And our autonomic nervous system, when we are in hypervigilant fight or flight, that affects our physiology. There's so many different physiological functions in the body that are impacted when we're in fight or flight. So when we can hit that purposeful pause, sit in the seat of the observer, see the thoughts, and notice which ones are just coming from external influence or, again, old programming. They're not actually us. They're not truth. They're not our true identity. They're not in alignment with our true identity. We can let them go on by, and it's not going to have an impact on our nervous system. Giving ourselves space to do this. And I'm not saying that every one of us needs to take 2 weeks off to go observe our thoughts, but even starting to create a purposeful pause, that's going to create the spaciousness that's going to then reveal our own internal patterns in our thinking. So, what happened for me as I was walking down the beach on my very last day of my trip, I'm noticing that my body is feeling a little bit stiffer. I'm feeling a little fluffier. I'm noticing the thoughts that old Jen. So I had a softer thought come up and I saw it and I was like, wow, that's so interesting. That did not trigger my nervous system to go into fight or flight. And I started to reflect on old Jen. And old Jen would create a very strict post vacation reset. I mean, I'm not so rigid and tight that I wouldn't allow myself to enjoy vacation indulgences. But the way that I managed myself for so long was to come up with the plan to counter on the other side of it. And the plan would usually feel really control-y. And anytime that I'm in control mode, I'm tighter. I'm like gripping. I can feel it. My shoulders get really tight. My solar plexus will get really tight. Internally, I feel really tight. And that's where that internal whip would come out for me. And new Jen that I got to meet last Thursday, new Jen said really softly and really kindly, "It's okay, Jen. It's so okay. We're going to find our center again. We don't need to do anything other than just be. You made intentional choices to let go and enjoy yourself. And can you trust that you will find your center again?" And when I said that to myself, I could feel so much love flood me for me. That right there, even that was a newer feeling for me. Feeling that love in the kind, soft way that I was speaking to myself. So, in the internal dialogue that I had, and then in recognizing that I was being kinder and softer with myself, I realized that up until that moment, I had been functioning in a way where I did not fully trust myself. I trusted God. I trusted my routines. I trusted the structure that I have in my days that help me to show up for my routines, but I didn't fully trust myself. And I'm going to make a little side note here because I'm not speaking against having routines, having structure, having a good plan. All of that can be really, really helpful, right? When we plan for success, we experience success. But there's something really subtle in this. And I'm sharing my story with you guys because perhaps there's an area in your life where you don't fully trust yourself. So some of your internal dialogue, which might be attached to some actions as well, might be still very tight, very controlling. So as I was realizing that up until that moment last Thursday, my internal dialogue and the ways that I managed myself was not actually aligned with a woman who fully trusted herself. I started unpacking it more and I started reflecting on why did I believe that I'd spiral out of control if I didn't have a really strict reset plan on the other side of a vacation? Why did I believe that I needed harshness to stay good? And harshness for me, I mean, we're all different, but the harshness for me has changed and evolved and shifted over the years. Again, in my 20s, I battled an eating disorder and body dysmorphia. And I can tell you that harsh 25-year-old Jen is not harsh 45-year-old Jen or 50-year-old Jen. She's changed and grown and softened a lot, but I could still be someone who beats myself up, like negative self talk, looking in the mirror, speaking really negatively to myself. That has become such an ingrained habit in my life that I do it without even thinking. I look in the mirror and I grab the extra flesh. At the end of the trip, Carmen and I started to catch ourselves because this is something that she too has struggled with throughout her adult life. And as spiritual friends, we challenge each other on it. So even if we were catching ourselves complaining to the other person, like, oh my God, my pants are tight, we would kindly reflect back at one another and it's okay. Did we not make an intentional decision to let go a little bit here? And do we not trust who we are and trust God within us to help us return to center on the other side versus indulging the other person in the negative self-talk and the swirl? I'm like, oh my gosh, a mutual commiseration can be really great in a lot of areas, but it also can perpetuate that swirl. So we didn't do that with each other. We definitely didn't do that. We were challenging one another and not grabbing on to the other person's potential swirl. I started asking myself questions like, why did I believe that in order for me to stay good, I actually needed to stay harsh with myself? And where did it even come from? And in self reflecting, I'm aware because, again, I have been working on this dynamic in myself for a really, really long time. And some of it was conditioned and learned. My father was a Marine, an ex-Marine. He's very fastidious with himself. He's also a man, and men are very different than women in their energy. But I really related to my dad more than I did to my mom. I wanted to please my father. I worked out with my dad from the time I was really, really young, which created connection for us. And our connection was often through discipline. My dad's an incredibly disciplined man. So I was praised when I was really disciplined too. And I learned that control, when I was controlling something, whatever it might be, fill in the blank, that gave me a sense of safety. That safety, again, became really equated with control. So whenever I felt unsafe, what did I do? I would control. So the question for all of us is, where are we still in our lives cracking a whip in the name of self-improvement? Where are we perhaps indulging in negative self-talk? Where are we being really harsh or strict with ourselves? Where are we beating ourselves up? One of the things that midlife has really invited me to do is take a look at where my energy has been more masculine than feminine. So masculine energy is very structured. It's very disciplined, achievement oriented. There is an element of fixing. Men are made to be protectors and providers. So there's an energy of driving forward. And this energy can be a little tighter. It's masculine energy. And then you put that up against feminine energy. So feminine energy has more flow. There's more fluidity. There's trust there. It's softer. It has softer edges. Feminine energy listens more than it speaks. There's a knowing center that's inevitable. And we need both. As women, we need some masculine energy. We have both in us. The divine masculine and divine feminine is in us. But if we are created here as a woman, then the divine feminine is dominant over the masculine, and vice versa if you're a man. Many women in midlife are absolutely exhausted from overly masculinizing their way of being in the world, over masculinizing their healing, how they approach life. I know because number one, I am a woman who has been, man, have I been leaning more and more and more into my femininity in midlife and taking a look at the areas where I was way too masculine. And I work with a lot of women. And I can tell you that many of us walk around with an imbalance in our feminine and our masculine energy, and we have too much masculine, and we're not meant to be masculine dominant. So what if returning to center doesn't require force? What if instead it requires trust? Think about that. That right there is a much more feminine way of being. It's not the masculine approach. I learned how to regulate my physical health, my physique, from a man. And I'm a woman. So unlearning that has required me to take a look at myself really honestly, which requires humility, and look at, again, where I was functioning in a way that wasn't serving me and it wasn't honoring God. So the body hears everything, absolutely everything. So even our thoughts that are floating through our head, our body is going to hear them. Now, if we let them blow on by because we become better and better at that purposeful pause, we sit in the seat of the observer, we notice, okay, I'm not going to tether myself to that thought. That is not going to serve me. That's not in alignment with my true identity. Then the nervous system is going to stay softer and more regulated because that feels safe, right? Our nervous system does not respond well to shoulds. It just doesn't. It doesn't respond well to harshness, because anytime we're harsh with ourselves, that equals a threat. And threat is going to dysregulate cortisol. So when our body perceives that there's a threat, even if it's just from our thoughts, we're going to have a spike in cortisol. Now, cortisol is a hormone that is regulated by our adrenal glands, and we need it. But we don't want to send the signal to our adrenal glands that we're under threat with something like a thought, right? We're going to save the surges in cortisol for when the body really needs to show up for real life threats. When we have cortisol spikes from our threatening thoughts, they're going to create in us contraction, that tightness. So we can ask ourselves, is our inner voice kind? Is it respectful? Is it loving? Is it safe? You may have heard me talk on other podcast episodes about KLRS, and many of my clients know KLRS. So KLRS is a very simple structure that I learned from my mentor, Molly, the years that I was really doing a lot of my own intense inner work, and we were doing work in our marriage and doing work with our children. And KLRS stands for kindness, love, respect, and a safe place to share. And if you approach every single person with KLRS, then you are in alignment with God. You're being kind and loving and respectful, and you're giving that other person a safe place to share. Well, we also need to be approaching ourselves with that too. Because as you heard in last week's podcast episode, when we rearrange our hierarchy is love God, receive that love from the unconditional love, the source of infinite everything, love ourselves from there, and then love other people. So, loving ourselves requires that we treat ourselves with kindness, respect, love, and a safe place to be. So, we can ask ourselves when we hear the inner dialogue, that's our own thoughts, we can say, again, kind, respectful, loving, safe. One of the things that I have used a lot in learning how to be kinder to me, how to better love me, is this question. I have two daughters. If I wouldn't speak to my daughter that way, why would I speak to myself that way? That one has been really, really convicting. So, as I observe my own thoughts and look for ways that I can better support my nervous system, ways that I can soften, because when we're regulating the nervous system, that leads to overall healing, right? I take inventory, and I take inventory often. And I think about, would I speak to either one of my daughters the way I speak to myself? And I can say honestly, the answer is no. No. So then, in my quest to learn how to love myself better, I've used that as a tool to assess how I'm speaking. So, trusting ourselves, learning how to trust ourselves. Learning how to trust ourselves really requires that we learn how to trust the divine within. When we learn how to trust ourselves, it's not feeding our ego. It's not laziness or indulgence. It's trusting our own rhythm. It's trusting that we, like for instance, on my trip, can return to center, that we have a deep inner connection with God, with the creator within ourselves. And we will be guided when we're paying attention to that. And it's trusting that we don't need punishment or harshness or strict, very masculine ways of being in order to be good. And I really realized that the more that I trust myself, the more that I trust the divine in me, because my true self is a reflection of the divine. So the more that I learn how to trust God, the more I'm trusting myself. The more that I'm trusting myself, the more that I'm trusting God. So as we're wrapping up this conversation, I want to offer you some gentle prompts, some questions for you to reflect on yourself and take a look so that you can take a look at the areas in your life where you might still be using an internal whip. Are there areas where you believe harshness, like being really harsh with yourself, equals safety? Take note. And perhaps you take note and you literally put it in a journal for you to explore. It might not be something that you're going to resolve overnight, but when we bring awareness to things, that awareness is the first step towards change. What we don't know, we can't fix or change or shift, but what we become more aware of empowers us. Right. And so awareness helps us to elevate in consciousness. So ask yourself, where do you not trust yourself? Is there any area where you don't trust yourself? And as a result, you've come up with maybe it's an internal dialogue to control, which for you is giving you a false sense of safety, like me. And then what would softening look like for you? Can it be being a little gentler with your internal dialogue? Can it be maybe not tethering to a thought, but just letting it float on by? Can it be speaking kinder or more loving to yourself? What would saying, I trust you to yourself feel like? I encourage you to journal. I'm actually going to take these questions and put them in the podcast notes so you can take a look at them and journal them and just invite in observation over the next few days after you've listened to this, over the next week. Go back to the journal, add to it as you observe. Many times we don't know what we don't know until we see it, until we notice it. I just came off of 2 weeks of a lot of observing, which helped me to see at the end of my trip some of my old internal dialogue and some of the ways that I've actually changed. Self-trust is built through softness. It's never built through force. Internal safety is cultivated more and more and more through kindness and trusting in yourself, my friends, is trusting in God within you. I appreciate you entering into this conversation with me. As I was reflecting on what to talk to you about in this podcast episode, I was praying about how to put it all into words, what I was observing in myself. And it just came back down to trust. And this journey that I know many of us are on to increase our ability to let go and surrender and trust. So I want to close us here today. I want to close this podcast episode with a prayer for each and every one of us. May we become women who trust ourselves. May we become women who have an inner voice that is kind, that is loving, that is respectful, and that creates safety. And may from this place, our nervous system feel safe and create safety within our own bodies. And may we soften in the areas where we've been hard. And may we remember that returning to center is always, always available for each and every one of us. Amen. If this podcast episode has blessed you in any way, please share it, leave a comment. I reply to all the comments. And if you are really feeling like you want to dig deeper into the topics that we talk about on this podcast episode, that you want to be in a community of other women who are rising and rising together, I am opening the Daily Surrender Circle this spring. The waiting list, I will put the link for it below in the show notes, is open so that you can be the first to hear when the doors open and join us for a beautiful sisterhood circle where we will be rising together, expanding on the topics that we talk about here on the podcast. It's for my podcast listeners, and create community, because we know that a rising tide floats all boats. Until next time, my friends, continue to surrender and receive the beautiful, abundant life that God has for you. Thank you for joining me on the Daily Surrender. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear your reflections. Send me a message, share this with a friend, or leave a review. Remember, true healing and freedom come when we let go, surrender, and trust that God's way is so much better than our way. Until next time, my friends, keep surrendering, keep rising, and keep walking in peace.